Hi, it's Elissa Weinzimmer, founder of Voice Body Connection, and it is time for another How to Warm Up video.
How to warm up.
In today's How to Warm Up video, we are going to practice easy onsets. Now, easy onsets are very important when you have a habit of doing what's called a glottal attack. And a glottal attack is when your vocal cords come together and then explode apart, and it makes a sound like this. Let me explain further. So here are your vocal cords in your airway, okay? When they're together, then you're not breathing, you're not sending any air through the airway. You're holding your breath. When they're slightly apart and the air comes through, they can start to phonate or vibrate, as it's called, right? And then when they're all the way open, you're just breathing, okay? Open airway. Now, sometimes people have a habit of pressing their vocal cords together before they start making sound, and then they send a burst of air through, and you get what's called a glottal onset, where the air comes bursting through and you get a little bit of almost, it sounds like a little hiccup in the vocal cords or a little bit of a pop. And when that happens, it's not necessarily an evil thing, but the issue is that many times people are using excess effort to press the vocal cords together in the first place, and that may mean that there's some tension or fatigue building up inside the throat. So to do an exercise that is an easy onset exercise, make sure during your warm-up that you are not using excess effort in your throat. Here's an exercise you can do. So we're going to use a very classic phrase to practice, which is Elliot ate an apple. Now, you may notice in that phrase that Elliot ate an apple are all words that start with a vowel. You can actually only ever do a glottal onset when you have a vowel at the beginning of the word. The reason is if you have a consonant, that means that your articulators are blocking the airflow somewhere else, so you can't also block the airflow at your throat. However, when you have a vowel that begins a word, you can block the airflow at your throat and start with a glottal onset. So someone who does this phrase with a glottal onset with glottal onsets would sound like this. Elliot ate an apple. Can you hear how there's a little bit of a pop at the beginning of every word? Elliot ate an apple. What we want to do instead is have an easy onset. We want to go, Elliot ate an apple. What I think this requires is thinking all the way down to the guts of you. You can go back to the breath support exercise in this How to Warm Up series and practice making sure that sound is flowing from your core, from your belly support up and out. Elliot ate an apple. Now, if this cue to have breath support is not quite doing the trick for you yet, here's the next thing you can do is put a mini little H sound on the beginning of your words that have vowels, okay? So you can go like Elliot, hate, and apple, and then you can make it smaller and smaller. Elliot, hate, and apple. Right? You're just making it really small little h. When you do that, what you're actually doing is training the vocal cords to stay slightly apart because you can't make that h sound unless they're slightly apart with air already flowing through them before you get to the vowel sound. And by the way, kudos to Edith Skinner, the matron of speech work in the US, for creating this exercise nearly a century ago. So this exercise can be done with Elliot ate an apple or really any sentence that begins with all vowel sounds. And once you master eliminating the glottal onsets in your exercise, of course, practice it in what you're singing, what you're speaking, whatever you are vocalizing on any given day. Now, this is indeed a sound exercise in the progression of the How to Warm Up series, so it pertains to the vocal cords and, of course, onset of sound. You can put it right smack dab in the middle of your warm-up. Enjoy, and I will see you soon in a How to Warm Up video.
How to warm up.